Hi everybody, my name is Lisette Coley and I'm seated within the Eileen J. Garrett Library in Greenport, New York. Very happy to be with our PF Research Fellow, Dr. James Matlock. And he's been busy running around the shelves doing work on a current project that we'll touch on in a bit. But right now I'd like to ask Jim a few questions, starting off with, what's your academic background, Jim?
Well, I'm an anthropologist. I got my degree in anthropology, late, mid-career, not in my 20s when most people go into graduate studies, but a little bit later. I got into parapsychology actually before my anthropology. For the purposes of this interview at the Parapsychology Foundation, I probably need to go back.
Good, let's go back and see how you got dragged into this.
My degree is in anthropology, but before I got into anthropology, I was into parapsychology. So how did that happen? How did I get into parapsychology? Well, my original hope for myself for a career was as a writer, as a creative writer.
Oh.
And that I held that idea through all my early life. As a child, I remember dictating stories to my mother, even before I was able to write them down myself. So I held this idea of being a writer for years, all the way through college. And in college, I wrote stories, published them in our literary magazine and so forth. And I tried to make a living as a writer, working on a novel and so forth after college. I went through my savings and just wasn't able to sell anything much, not enough.
And one does need to pay the rent, right?
Right, one does, and especially when savings runs out, needs to find something else to do. So at one point I thought, well, maybe I should give up on fiction and try nonfiction. And I went to my local public library. I was living in Arlington, Virginia at the time. Went to the local public library there, and this is late 1970s. I graduated from college from Emory in 1973, and had there majored in English because I wanted to be a writer, and I thought that would be good preparation. And came close to a double major in psychology, which I thought also would help me, in understanding people, and that would help me in my writing. The psychology at Emory was, at that time, in the early 70s even, was still very much in the Skinnerian mode. And so I was sort of trained in Skinnerian behaviorism. And by the time I left college in 1973, I was already questioning.
The bloom was off the rose at that point.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I just, it didn't take with me. I was already questioning this. And so I started reading more and more in the New Age stuff, which was so important in the 70s.
Well, in the 70s, yeah.
So by 1979, 1980, when I decided that I was going to try something in nonfiction, I naturally went to that section of the library. And I was browsing around through the stacks looking for something that was interesting, and I found at least a shelf. I don't remember quite how much there was. At least a full shelf of books on reincarnation. And I hadn't really thought of it before as a subject of study, but here I was faced with these books, and I saw some by Stevenson. Looked at them and decided to leave them for later. They looked a little bit more advanced. I started, I believe, as far as I can recall, with hypnotic regression, which would surprise a lot of people now who know my work now and my attitudes towards regression. But I started off with hypnotic regression. Actually took it quite seriously, my study of it, that is. And, I went through the books and, making index cards for each case I found and so forth. And, anyway, after I'd done that, then I went to Stevenson.
Now, how did you get to Stevenson? Just by mail or just...
No, I went to Stevenson's books.
Oh, I see. Okay.
I hadn't gotten to getting actually to Stevenson yet. But his books opened me to the world of parapsychology because his books are more scholarly. They had all these citations in it. They had all these references to the Journal of the American Society for Psychical Research, the Journal of the Society for Psychical Research, the Journal of Parapsychology, all of these. I had no idea that this field existed, you see, until I read Stevenson. So he sort of opened my mind, to all of this. And at that point, in quick order, I began subscribing to all of the journals and getting in touch with people. I was again reading more and more. One thing that really helped me, and moving beyond reincarnation also, was that when I realized that there was serious study of survival questions, of mediumship, of apparitions, and of all of these things that I'd sort of been reading about from a New Age sort of standpoint, that serious research was being done on them. I was hooked. One other thing I can add about this early stage was it coincided with a job as a research assistant that I got at the Library of Congress.
Oh, wow.
I was hired to do something. The work that I was hired to do was very different. It was a very different project. I was working for somebody I was working as a research assistant for somebody who was working on his PhD at the time. But as his research assistant at the Library of Congress, I had a desk and a stack pass.
Oh.
And in my spare time, I used
You
that
prowl
stack
around?
pass. That's right. And everything was there, of course. Full runs of all of the journals, any book that I would want, right, and so I spent all of my spare time in the Library of Congress.
Did you work on his project?
Yes. I'm
teasing you.
I did my
I'm
work.
teasing you. Yeah.
But then after that,
The Call of the Wild.
All my spare time was spent on that. By 1985, I was feeling ready to write a book about reincarnation. In that year, though, Scott Rogo came out with his book.
Beat you to the punch a little bit?
He beat me to the punch, right. And I knew about that book, but I didn't have it. It was just out. But I went that year it was my first Parapsychological Association meeting, the professional meeting. It was at Tufts University, and Rogo happened to be there. And I can't remember whether I bought or he gave me a copy of his book. And I immediately saw that, this is something that I could review.
Right.
So I approached John Beloff, who was then the editor of the Journal of the Society for Psychic Research, the SPR. And he agreed that I could review the book, and that became my first publication in Parapsychology.
That got your feet wet.
Yes,
definitely.
Yeah. So this is how I got into parapsychology. We still haven't gotten to me getting into anthropology, but that at least got me into parapsychology.
Mm-hmm. And how did you make the segue to anthropology? And did you drag your interest in parapsychology as it pertains within anthropology, or?
I did, yes. Well, that's, again, a story. I mean, just continue this then until we get to that point. During this same period, having realized that I wasn't going to be able to realize my dream, my lifelong dream of being a writer, my first choice of a career was librarianship. So I went to library school.
And that's how,
And
yeah,
got a
because
degree
you're
in library science, because I was interested in books and
figures. That makes
just
sense.
a natural thing in research, and it just seemed a natural thing. So I went to library school, and it was while I was in library school that I was getting more and more intensely interested in them. I decided to become an archivist, and because I was interested in parapsychology, I did a study paper. We weren't required to write a thesis, but it was it was equivalent to one. There was a survey of archival collections in parapsychology. So I wrote to different repositories that had collections and wrote a paper that was published eventually in Jasper, in the Journal of the American Society for Psychical Research. And that brought me to the attention, of the people at the ASPR.
Okay.
And part of my task was not just writing to people, but I actually went up to the ASPR and worked in their collections in the course of collecting the information. And I was asked to put their archives in order. So I did that. This is, I guess, 84 and 85, or 85 and 85 and 86, I guess. And then they asked me if I'd like to join staff. And nothing like volunteering.
Yes, to get your foot in the door,
right. So I was at the ASPR for 2 years.
As the librarian?
As librarian and archivist, that was my title, a librarian and archivist. That was 87 and 88. It also, during that same period, I began to do my own research, my own writing, and gradually realized that, well, I enjoyed being a librarian. I enjoyed doing my own research more. I really wanted to do my own research and my own writing and not just help other people do theirs. I thought about what field that I wanted to go on and get a PhD in. And psychology was out because of my experience at Emory.
Right, undergrad,
with Skinner. I had no desire to continue in psychology. And anthropology appealed to me, partly because I had grown up moving around. My father's in the Foreign Service, and so
Oh,
I had moved a lot as a child and gotten to know other
Different
cultures,
cultures.
particularly in Africa and Europe and so forth. And so I was interested already in culture and other people, how other people lived and thought and so forth. But also because a lot of Stevenson's cases, you see, occurred in other places, other parts of the world. Parapsychological phenomena had been reported from a lot of different. So it just seemed a natural,
fertile ground to pursue
and one
these
that not
interests.
everybody was doing, because most parapsychologists had the backgrounds in psychology, some in physics and so forth, but very few at that point. Now there are more of us who were trained as anthropologists. So it just seemed something that
A natural fit.
a natural fit for me, and something I could contribute as well. And that's how I got to the anthropology.
Okay. But the reincarnation was there right from the beginning because of your trip to the stacks at the
Right. Well, from the
Congress.
beginning being 1980, I
Yeah.
really hadn't, and I was out of college by then. I'm in my 20s. Before I took up the reincarnation, I really hadn't thought much about it before that.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, as I went into anthropology, began my MA work in anthropology, I was keenly interested in reincarnation. In fact, I did my MA at Hunter in New York, because the ASBR where I was working was in New York. So at Hunter, every term paper I did for my master's at Hunter had a reincarnation as a theme. So I was able to use my interest
and draw from that.
And draw from that in my studies. And so that just, it taught me a lot about reincarnation. It also taught me a lot about anthropology, and in a way that was meaningful to me.
So. Well, I think we first met in, what did you tell? You reminded me at one of the PF conferences, I think it was on human nature, in 1986 down
in 86 in Washington.
In Washington,
right.
yeah, for sure. So
yes,
you were busy making the rounds in those days, which you've continued, for sure.
Well, I was, it's somehow I came to your attention, the PF's attention, and somebody, I don't know if it was you, your mother, somebody sent me an invitation. I wouldn't have known about it. Sent me an invitation to the conference.
Well, we were always looking for bright sparks and somebody who could possibly be helped along to make their mark. So for once we're back to winter with you. So this is this is good.
Yeah,
this is good.
I met a lot of people there, including Carlos Sosis, whom I got to know better at the ASPR.
Right.
So he was still there, as research.
So little by little bit, all these all your interests and your academic has led you then to allow yourself to be more totally immersed in the study of reincarnation, which would have been, how did you get to the University of Virginia and Stevenson's work? How did that come about? At what point of time?
Well, I never worked with him. I've never had the opportunity. Well, I was interested, in reincarnation from 1980 on, and by 1985, when Rogo's book came out, it wasn't Rogo's book, but there were other things that had been written that I saw or I felt needed correctives. So I wrote a paper and sent it to the University of Virginia, to Stevenson, for comment, and that brought me to their attention. Mm-hmm. And I know Emily Cook, now Kelly, and Carlos Alvarado is now
another research fellow with the
another
foundation.
research fellow with the Parapsychology.
A long-term employee and good friend of the foundation, for sure.
He was then a research assistant with
Dr. Stevenson, right?
With Dr. Stevenson, and one or the other of them, Emily or Carlos, wrote back and asked me whether I would like to go there as Stevenson's research assistant, because Emily was about to leave for her doctoral studies. So there was an opening there, and I was of course delighted.
Wow!
With it. With the possibility. Stevenson himself was away. He was in Cambridge. Periodically he would go there, usually on his sabbatical years, but I think more often than that, would go there to work on his books. So this happened to be a year that he was away. They wrote to him. This is before email and all these modern
snail mail,
communications, right? About it, but he, for some reason, without having met me or anything, he didn't want me. I wasn't the only one. There were others. They wrote back and when they said that he had decided against me. They said that they had put up several people to him, and they didn't know what what
what he was necessarily looking for.
what he was looking for, right? But anyway, that was my first
entree
into that, and I met him, Stevenson himself, a year or two later after he was back in the States, and we became good friends. He was always very, very polite, very nice, very
lovely
welcoming
gentleman, right?
Very,
really scholar, but lovely gentleman.
Very, very lovely. Always took me out to lunch, and we always had a nice chat. And, even though I had been thinking about graduate studies, it was Stevenson who sort of pushed me towards it, because he pointed out that in order to be able to make any sort of serious contribution, other than as a librarian of my own, a contribution of my own, I needed to have an advanced degree, not just a master's in library science.
So you owe him a debt, apart from stimulating your interest in reincarnation, certainly to help propel you into that camp, no?
Yes.
Well, you also served a bit of time at the Rhine Center, too. Weren't you involved in their archives or library? Or
I did.
Yeah.
I was there at a couple of different points. One, when I was at the ASPR, I was working as librarian and archivist, and also before that, as I said, I had been reaching out to different repositories who had collections related to parapsychology. That brought me to the attention of the people at Duke, who had the Parapsychology laboratory papers of Rhine, J.B. Rhine.
All of his papers are there, no, at Duke?
Yes, everything is Duke. He left everything to Duke. That's where the lab was, for so many years, and so they left everything to Duke, but it hadn't been processed. And so when Duke got ready to process that collection, I just put it in order and so forth.
Oh, wow.
They knew of me, and so that's why,
well, you could also spell parapsychology.
I could hope so. Yeah, that helps. I seemed like the natural person to them. To do it. So actually I went down not to be at Vernon at this point, at the Rhine Center, but to be at Duke, and then when it was 9 months, and then Dr. Rao, who was then in charge of Fernham, the Foundation for Research on the Nature of Man, where later became where the Rhine Center was.
I know, but it was a charming title, the Foundation for Research on Man, really.
Yeah, right, but he invited me to spend the 3 months of the year there before I returned to New York to resume studies at Hunter, because I'd started before I went down.
Well, you've certainly been intimately involved with the big centers or the players, haven't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's quite
fortunate that way, but I haven't been at any one of them for very long.
How'd you miss PF? We screwed up. Darn, really. I couldn't entice you now. No, I know reincarnation, but still.
But I visited a lot.
Yes, that's true. That's true. When you were at our lectures in the library,
when you were on East 71st, because I was on East
73rd,
West 72nd, and just across Central Park.
Right, for sure.
I certainly visited a lot, and we met at the conference, but then that's where I saw you again, got to know your mother, and
the whole became part of the PF traveling family
circus.
Circus, that's it, the bandwagon.
And at conferences I went, began to go to your annual conferences.
So now, what are you up to now? I know you. What are you involved with now?
Well, now
you teaching, or
I do teach a course online. Through to explain how we get there, we have to step back again, go through some more steps. It was around 2011, 2012. Nancy Sangroni called or wrote to me and asked me whether I would like to be part of a new parapsychology program that she was organizing at Atlantic University. And I said yes. This sounds. I'd sort of been out of the field until then. After getting my graduate studies, after finishing my degree, I'm hesitating here because I'm realizing, after I finished my degree, I went to Durham to the Rhine Center for my second stint there.
Okay.
But that also didn't last very long. Nancy's invitation to get back into this was what brought me back into parapsychology and back into reincarnation, because she asked me to design a course on reincarnation for a new program in parapsychology
that they had hoping to
launch. They were hoping, right. Then when that was canceled, I left because the program that I had been
Yeah,
brought
it
in,
sort of the
right,
carpet
was
was
no
removed,
longer, right,
out from under you.
was no longer to be. But I continued to develop the course and eventually began to teach it under the Isaiah, which is
Their organization.
the website and organization that Nancy has with her husband Carlos. And I still teach it there. I've been teaching it on an annual basis. It's a 15-week semester-long course. It was designed, as a semester course that covers the subject of reincarnation.
Soup to nuts, sort of?
Yeah. I mean, I talk about reincarnation beliefs, the history of beliefs, how to study these cases, or how Stevenson studied them, and so forth. And then I review, all of the case material.
Wow, so after a 15-week stint,
and
someone who takes your course should really have a real grounding in an understanding.
That's the idea of it.
Yeah.
And then develop a theory of reincarnation, because I think that that's where we are. I think it's where we are in parapsychology, but particularly in survival and reincarnation research. We have a lot of data now. But we're in need of good, satisfactory theories that more than a few people accept. We have a lot of theories, but they're sort of niche theories. I mean,
so you're trying to put an overarching one big
right, something that
tie it up in a bow.
Yeah.
When's the next one going to be? Because we're May.
Yes.
2018.
Right.
So
that's a good question. And I from the beginning the course is designed as a graduate level seminar course, because the course that we were designing was at the MA level. So the course that I designed was also pitched at the MA level, and it's designed to be a seminar, so that I have people read lectures and independent readings, things that people other than me have written, and then discuss them in online forums. And that format allows me to have students from around the world. We don't have set meeting times. People read on their own time and then discuss on their own time in these forums. You post to the forum and somebody
then they
replies. Right. So that's the course set up. Well, I realized from the beginning, if I needed to write out my lectures, I might as well work towards a book. Anyway, this I finally finished my course book, and this relates to when I'm going to teach the course again, because I didn't teach it this year, so that I'll have time. To finish the book, but it's not finished, and now I need to find a publisher for it. So I may teach it again next year.
Is your course really one of the few that are available? Can one go and study in various universities reincarnation? I don't believe so. Can you? In any depth?
Not in this.
Not like this.
No, not in this depth. And as far as I know, there's not another offering, even in
comparable
course,
to.
Certainly not fully comparable to it, but even partially so. That is a semester-long course just on reincarnation. There are courses here and there that are taught that cover parapsychology topics that will include reincarnation.
Yes, but not
as a lecture, but not focusing on not a full semester length course only on that topic. No.
Well, since you've been involved in reincarnation for many years, it seems, do you see a greater interest in reincarnation now, or has it changed since you first heard of it? I mean.
Yes, I think there is more interest now. In 2011 or so, I had effectively been out for 10, 15 years. I hadn't really been following the research. I hadn't, really been in touch with people very much. I noticed a real difference. It was like going through a time warp.
Really?
It was, and because of the 10, 15 years, it was much more apparent to me than had I just continued all the way through, I think. But yes, it's striking to me now how much more acceptable it is to talk about reincarnation, and how much more awareness there is that there is really serious research out there that gives us some reason to think, well, maybe in fact it does occur.
Mm-hmm. And to really look into it in depth.
Another thing in this, and I might mention also that I have a Facebook group that I administer called Signs of Reincarnation that has brought me in touch with many people.
And a diverse population,
a very diverse population, many of whom have past life memories, or claim to, feel like they do, have had experiences, dream experiences, waking experiences. Some have had children who have had the sorts of experiences that Stevenson studied. And it's put me in touch with those people in a way I would not have been able to be in touch with before, and made me realize how common these experiences are,
really?
Even in our Western society. Yes, very common. A lot of people have these experiences. The difference is there are many fewer, stronger cases of the type that Stevenson studied in Asia. Mm-hmm. They occur here, but there are many fewer of them, and therefore they're less visible.
I see, yeah. In our dinner conversation last night, I was surprised to learn that there was quite so much going on in the States, always thinking erroneously that it was over in Tibet or India or whatever. So that was it's part of the human condition, apparently.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, this is one of my one of the points I'd like to make. I think it is absolutely part of the human condition. In fact, and one of the interesting things I got into anthropology and was doing this. I mentioned, I managed to do every term paper. It was somehow connected to reincarnation because reincarnation beliefs and these same phenomena occur all over the world, including in tribal societies. Mm-hmm. I did my master's thesis as a cross-cultural study looking at reincarnation beliefs and social practices, because I had noticed in my reading that there were so many, in indigenous societies, tribal societies, there were so many social practices that were tied to the belief in reincarnation. I wanted to look at that in a systematic way, and so that's what my master's thesis was about.
I was also not surprised, but I took great note that you mentioned to me that within the study of reincarnation, a lot of our parapsychological psychical phenomena appear within the cases of reincarnation, which I didn't understand fully either.
Yeah,
so that
very much so, and I think you're right.
Parapsychology should take note of that. Yeah,
they should, I believe, and it's not just you. I think this generally is not realized that within the reincarnation cases we have all of the other parapsychological phenomena, not just survival phenomena like mediumship or apparitions can enter into the cases, but also
telepathy.
Telepathy and precognition and psychokinesis all have a role in the cases. And they also have a theoretical role, but just they occur in the cases.
That's very interesting.
And they become. Let me mention this because it becomes an issue of interpretation of whether the information the children have about previous lives could have been gleaned through their ESP. Mm-hmm. When I talk about ESP entering, I don't mean just that. I mean these children, very few of the children exhibit any sort of ESP to begin with. But the few who do often have ESP going on, not in relation to their present lives, but in relation to the previous lives that they remember. They're picking up impressions of their previous spouses and so forth.
Oh, really? That's interesting.
Isn't it? Yeah. So they're still in touch with that. So, but then you can interpret this to say, okay, so they're just for some reason or other they've picked this up, and then they've fantasized or they've developed this whole story through this ESP, that this then is evidence. Right. This then is evidence that all the cases are based simply on ESP. Well, that sort of falls apart because it's not just these memories that children have. They also have behaviors. They behave like, they have personalities like the previous people whose lives they recall, right? They may have birthmarks and other physical things. And it's very difficult to explain transmission of personality, of interests,
Yeah, I was.
behaviors, physical things by ESP. I mean, how do we do that? You know? So the more you look at the data, the more this super XP explanation for them, you know, it just becomes untenable. But all of the parts of parapsychology, including psi, come into play in these cases.
It's interesting. It's a different way of looking at it, because I was always thinking of reincarnation as just the weak sister of, you know, when you're looking in terms of psychic phenomena, and now you're flipping it and saying...
I am. And, you know, and experimental parapsychologists, you know, are, you know, they treat all of survival research as a stepchild. But I believe that you really can't understand psi without accepting survival, because psi abilities are a part of consciousness. They're an attribute of consciousness. And we see them exhibited during a discarnate period as well. It's very clear then that psi has nothing to do with the body. It has to do with consciousness and can exist without the body. So until parapsychologists, the experimental sorts of them, get to the point of fully embracing survival, I don't think they're ever really going to understand psi.
Interesting. Is this part of the Matlock theory to come?
Well,
Another book?
Yeah, I guess it is.
Definitely so. Definitely so.
I suppose it is, because you know, seemingly it's something that many people just don't realize or haven't thought of.
Not at all.
And there is some resistance to this, I suppose. I don't know, but there could be. Certainly, the experimental parapsychologists don't like to consider survival.
Well, it's messy, and it's
you know, and so they must have some idea about how psi. The reason for psi, the purpose of psi, or the etiology, the genesis of psi, that doesn't include the idea of survival. I don't know how they do it, but apparently they do, or they just haven't thought about it.
Compartmentalizing. That's
or they just haven't thought about it enough to realize.
Okay,
that,
well then they have to.
So.
Follow your career.
So there, Thank you.
Well, I want to talk about the project that brought you here, but before we do that, can you just briefly discuss the book that you did with Erlendur Haraldsson?
Okay. Erlendur is a field investigator. He's one of the best in parapsychology, sort of old school, very much like Stevenson.
Yeah.
And his original interest was in mediumship, doing kinds of mediumship. Where he did a lot of his work, but he got interested also in the reincarnation studies. So when he got ready to write his book on, to pull his cases together in a book, write his book on reincarnation, he asked me if I would
collaborate
with him on it. Well, our times didn't really mesh very well, so what we ended up doing, instead of collaborating, our original idea was we collaborate in every chapter. What we ended up doing is he wrote one part of it, he wrote his part of it, and then I wrote my part of it. He has 2/3 of the book, I have 1/3 of it. And that was really better for me, because I was able to present my ideas.
As a whole. As a whole,
instead of having to negotiate.
And the title of the book is?
I Saw a Light and Came Here.
Thank you.
And the subtitle is Children's Experiences of Reincarnation. Not a literal, but close quote to one of his subjects, a Sri Lankan subject, who said after she died, she saw a light, and then the next thing she knew, she came here, that is, to this life, to her present life. So
is that is that a common thing that the people talk about lights as they do in NDEs?
No,
with reincarnation?
It's actually, and that's a very interesting question. No, it's not. Some reviewers of the book have, at least online reviews on Amazon, have said that they're sort of disappointed that we didn't have more about the intermission period between lives, because the title seems to suggest that we were going to.
Yeah.
But in fact, it is unusual to have. She's not the only one, but it is unusual.
It's less common, in other words. Yeah.
Yeah. Now that's interesting in itself, because the light phenomena, although it's very closely associated with NDEs, occurs mostly in Western NDEs, and we don't see it, in Asian NDEs. So here's an Asian reincarnation case with the light. whereas most of them don't have the light. And it's sort of consistent with that. So the reincarnation data, again, is consistent with the NDE data in that respect, at least.
Right.
And in some other respects, there's a great deal of overlap between them. But
Interesting.
yeah.
But what has brought you specifically now to the Garrett Library, and what are you on the trail of?
Well, my new project, having finally finished my course book, my Signs of Reincarnation course book, turning to my next project, which is a study of Ian Stevenson's reincarnation work.
An overview type
at-
thing, Jim, or just sort of reintroducing him? Not that he needs introducing,
Right.
but perhaps he does to a new, generation.
I hope it's going to be that, in part. The book is going to be for a university press, and so I need to write something. They want something that's suitable for classroom use at a university level. So it's I need to do something in the history and sociology, philosophy of science in a realm. So I'm looking at the nature of the work, what he did, the way he went about his studies, in the field. And his different books, how they were received by different people, by critics, by those supporters, how that changed over time. Because early on there was a lot of criticism. By the 90s it had changed, like we were talking about. There does seem to be a change now from the 80s and the 70s. And so then in the 90s things began to change and be more favorable for him. Even while a lot of resistance continued. And yet one can see more people beginning to take it seriously, more people being more accepting of it, at least as an area of study.
And you came to PF because Eileen Garrett funded Dr. Stevenson for many years.
She funded quite a lot of his research, yes. She funded his first field trip to India. And,
which resulted in the
Sri
famous
Lanka
20 cases
of reincarnation. That was part of it. The 6 of the cases and 20 cases suggested for reincarnation, which she also subsidized the printing of.
I wasn't aware of that. Really?
It was originally published as the Proceedings of the American Society for Psychical Research in 1966.
Yeah.
And they didn't have enough money. It's a hardbound Proceedings. Right, it was a full-length book. They didn't have enough. The ASBO didn't have enough money, so she came in.
She did?
Yes, she came in and
good for
subsidized.
Thank you, her ladyship. Yeah.
And even after that first trip, the Parapsychology Foundation continued to give him annual grants and support for many years, and so he really owes a lot. And consequently, you have quite a lot of correspondence.
Yeah, it's been fun to have you here because you've pointed my nose in places to look. So I'm learning our history for sure.
Yeah.
So
and it's been great being back. In your new location and seeing you again.
Thank you for sure. So that means that you're going to do a redo and come back, correct? Because there's lots more to plow on these shelves. And you sound like the man to do that, and as research fellow.
Yeah, I would love to.
So it's been a pleasure to have you with us. I think now we've got to look out for the next course, the course book, the Stevenson book. We are going to be very, attentive to all your good works. So I thank you for your visit.
Yeah,
all right. Till next time, huh?
Till next time.
All right.
Hi there. My name is Lisette Coley, and I serve as president of Parapsychology Foundation. I want to welcome you to the Foundation's YouTube channel. There's already a wealth of information available posted, and we have plans to continue to post our classic lectures and new materials, so you don't want to miss out. So hit that bell, please subscribe, and you'll be notified. And hope you enjoy.